It should have been fatal. One shot to the head, point blank. But when her body hit the ground and the dust settled, she wasn't dead. Not even close. The bullet somehow had bent inside her skull, sparing her brain by a fraction of a millimeter. What followed wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a declaration of war. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of Layla Varga, the woman who defied death, outsmarted a brutal paramilitary force, and turned a remote village ambush into one of the most unbelievable escapes in recent history. But before the world knew her name, before the media headlines turned her into a legend, she was just a linguistics student caught in the wrong place at the worst possible time. The attack came without warning. Layla had been traveling in the mountains of eastern Valderan, a disputed border region where tensions simmered between local militias and the central government. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't trained for war. She had come as part of a humanitarian project, teaching children in rural areas how to read and speak 3 languages. For 2 months, she'd lived among the villagers in Kazran, a quiet, frost-covered hamlet nestled against the cliffs. People were poor, yes, but generous. She was welcomed, protected, respected, until the trucks rolled in. There was no mistaking the insignia: black flags, masked men, weapons that had no business in a place like this. The Goran Front, a rogue militia known for mass kidnappings and forced conscription, had come for blood. They accused the villagers of collaborating with the government, hiding intelligence officers among the civilians. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter to the Goran Front. They rounded everyone up: children, elders, workers, and separated them into groups. Layla stood beside the village elder, her hands raised, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the shouting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They found her foreign ID. That was enough. Spy, one of them hissed. Government plant. She tried to explain, tried to plead, but the man in charge, a brute named Serjak, wasn't interested in stories. He wanted an example, something that would terrify the rest of the region. He raised the pistol, pressed it to her forehead, and pulled the trigger. Everything went black for a moment. No pain, just the impact, the force, then the thud of her body hitting the frozen soil. Around her, the villagers screamed, but no one moved. Serjak spit on the ground and walked away, assuming the job was done, but it wasn't. Layla's heart was still beating. Barely. The bullet had entered just above her right eyebrow, but rather than tearing through, it had struck at a rare angle, hitting the front bone, ricocheting sideways under the skin, and lodging itself behind her ear, leaving her unconscious but alive. One of the villagers, a boy named Rijan, just 12 years old, noticed her fingers twitching. He knelt beside her, whispered prayers, and after the militia left, he and a few brave others carried her to the back of a goat shed, where she lay hidden for the next 48 hours, hovering between life and death. When she finally opened her eyes, she didn't know where she was. Her head throbbed. Her vision blurred, but slowly, memory returned, and so did the fear. She had been shot. She should be dead, but she wasn't, and the realization planted something deep inside her. Not just a will to survive, but something colder, sharper. She'd been spared for a reason, and if she was going to live, she wouldn't just run, she would fight. Outside, the village had turned into a military checkpoint. The Goran Front was still there, using Kazran as a temporary base, while planning to move further into the region. Escape seemed impossible, but Layla had a gift: languages. She had spent years mastering dialects, accents, tonal shifts. With a shaved head and burn marks masking her face, she could pretend to be one of them. If she could get past the outer patrol disguised as a local informant, maybe she could reach the mountains. Maybe she could find help, or maybe she'd die trying. But something else was brewing. One of the villagers, a former soldier named Arkan, believed that Layla's survival wasn't just luck, it was a sign. He had once fought in the Valderan Civil War, and he knew what bullets did to skulls. What happened to Layla defied everything he'd seen. "The mountain gods have chosen you," he whispered to her, offering her his old radio, and a map carved on the back of a food tin. "You're not done yet." As night fell, and the cold crept in through the cracked wooden slats of the shed, Layla sat up for the first time since being shot. Her vision swam, her balance faltered, but she could still move. Outside, the sound of engines and barking orders echoed through the snow-drenched valley. It was now or never, and this was only the beginning. The cold was cruel, but it kept her awake. Every breath scraped like glass inside her chest as Layla crawled out from behind the shed, wrapped in rags and the blood-soaked remnants of her scarf. She moved like a ghost between the snow-laced fences, her body trembling, her senses raw. Her face was barely recognizable, bloated, bruised, half covered in dried blood, but in the darkness, that worked in her favor. The Goran front didn't expect survivors, and they certainly didn't expect her. She wasn't planning to walk out of the village, that would have been suicide. Instead, she planned to become one of them, to slip into the ranks, not as a soldier, but as a nameless, unnoticed errand runner, the kind they barely paid attention to. With her knowledge of the local dialects, and her half-Valdorani features, she could blend in, if she moved fast, and if no one looked too closely. She needed gear, she needed papers, and she needed time. She found her first opportunity outside the animal stalls. A teenage boy, barely older than Rijan, sat hunched over a fire barrel, fiddling with a torn boot. His Goran front armband was sloppily sewn. He wasn't one of the core fighters, probably a new recruit, someone local forced to wear the uniform. As Layla approached from the shadows, she clutched a shard of glass hidden in her palm. Her legs threatened to give out, but adrenaline pushed her forward. With trembling hands, she wrapped her scarf higher over her face and limped toward him. "Surjak sent me," she muttered, mimicking the rough cadence of the militia's mountain dialect. The boy didn't even look up. "You're late," he grumbled. That was all she needed. Within seconds, she struck one quick motion, the shard pressed to his throat. He didn't even have time to scream. She whispered a soft apology as he slumped against the barrel. Quickly, she stripped his jacket, his boots, and the armband. She found a half-burnt ID card in his pocket and smeared some dirt across the photo. Her disguise was ready. She didn't feel good about it, but she didn't have the luxury of guilt. By dawn, Layla had infiltrated the lower ranks of the camp. She carried crates, hauled fuel, served bowls of sour millet to soldiers who didn't know her name and didn't care to ask. Her head ached constantly, and the wound throbbed beneath the bandages Arkan had wrapped. Sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of herself in a cracked window, haunted eyes, hollow cheeks, a face that barely resembled the young woman who had once dreamed of becoming a language professor. But every day she survived, she grew colder, smarter, more determined. She started picking up information, routes, patrol changes, names. She learned that Surjak had moved headquarters 3 kilometers east, into a half-destroyed hydro station in the cliffs. He was gathering fuel, food, and weapons for a winter assault. The plan was to take control of the pass and cut off access to Valdaran reinforcements for weeks. If he succeeded, the Goran front would control the mountain border. Layla knew she couldn't let that happen. Not just because of what they'd done to her, but because of what they'd do to the other villages, if they weren't stopped. She began slipping coded messages into crates, bound for the village of Torbek, hoping the rumors of a resistance cell there were true. She used old trade symbols and ancient dialectic glyphs no one else in the camp could read. It was a gamble, but it was better than doing nothing. She wasn't alone. Rijan continued to sneak her food at night, bringing her boiled roots and scraps he stole from the militia's supply tent. He told her that Arkan had vanished the night after she disappeared, likely captured or killed. Layla felt the loss like a gut punch, but she didn't cry. She couldn't afford tears. Not yet. Then came the raid. A sudden explosion rocked the edge of the camp, then another. Gunfire lit the morning sky, and screams echoed down the ravine. Layla dove behind a woodpile, heart hammering. She thought the resistance had arrived, but this wasn't the resistance. It was a rival militia, one even worse than the Goran front, the Nerit Raiders, known for massacres, known for their cruelty. They weren't there to liberate. They were there to take. Chaos erupted, soldiers scattered, civilians screamed, and in the chaos, Layla made a decision. She wouldn't run, not yet. She grabbed a fallen rifle, dragged Rijan behind a collapsed storage crate, and began calculating. The Nerid raiders outnumbered the Goran front, fighters 2-1. But Layla noticed something the others didn't. The raiders weren't working as a unit. They were looting individually, disorganized, unfocused. She saw a weakness, an opportunity. She slipped through the chaos, taking out a raider from behind, with a crowbar. Then another. Her movements were fast, brutal, precise. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped hesitating. She wasn't a linguist anymore. She was something else now, something sharper, something forged in the fire of betrayal and survival. By the end of the day, the camp was in ruins. Bodies littered the snow. The raiders had taken what they wanted, and vanished into the cliffs. But Layla was still alive, and now she had something even more valuable than disguise, or maps information. She knew where Serjak was. She knew when he was moving, and she knew how to stop him. All she needed now was a plan. Night blanketed the valley like a shroud, muffling every sound except the slow crackle of burning debris from the ruined camp. Layla crouched beneath the charred remains of a roof beam, breathing through the soot-stained cloth wrapped over her nose. The air was thick with smoke and something darker, gunpowder, blood, and the stench of burned fabric. Most of the Goran front fighters were dead. The Nerid raiders had torn through the place, like wild dogs, taking weapons, fuel, and anyone they thought might be worth ransoming. The rest were left to rot. Layla moved silently, picking through corpses in search of supplies. She wasn't scavenging for weapons. She had those now. What she needed was knowledge. Somewhere in the wreckage were orders, maps, manifests, anything that could tell her where Serjak was heading. She knew he wouldn't stay put after the raid. If anything, he'd accelerate his plans to seize the mountain pass. That made him predictable, and predictability could be exploited. Near the collapsed command tent, she found what she was looking for, a half-burned leather satchel, stamped with the Goran front seal. Inside was a folded topographic map of the eastern ridgelines, marked in red ink with routes, supply points, and coded checkpoints. One symbol stood out, a triangle etched near an abandoned radar station, called Dazrut's Peak. It was remote, barely reachable by vehicle, but high enough to provide full surveillance over the pass. And the date next to it was 2 days from now. Layla stared at the map, her heartbeat steadying. That's where Serjak would regroup. That's where he'd launch the offensive. And that's where she'd finish this. But she couldn't do it alone. Rijan limped toward her, from the tree line, a cloth bundle in his arms. He had barely slept. The boy had lost his older brother in the raid, dragged away by raiders, but he hadn't cried once. He was harder now, sharper. The fear was still in his eyes, but so was something else, conviction. He handed Layla the bundle. It was food, water, and a field radio, its battery half dead. I can take you through the lower ridge, he said quietly. There's a hidden path, the Nerid don't know it. But we need to leave tonight. Layla nodded. We'll go, but not just us. She couldn't ignore the other survivors, 4 of them, all injured, hiding in the root cellar beneath the grain hut. One had a shattered leg. Another was near mute from trauma. They were a burden, tactically speaking, but she couldn't leave them. Not after everything they'd endured. And maybe, just maybe, they could help. Each of them had seen something, heard something. Layla needed every scrap of intel she could gather before she faced Serjak again. She gathered the survivors, divided what little gear they had, and memorized the ridge route. Rijan drew with charcoal, on the back of a burnt tarp. It would take them through icy gullies, across frost-crusted cliffs, and into the ruins of Arazan, a village swallowed by an avalanche, years ago and now, used as a smuggler's hideout. If they could make it that far, they could rearm, rest, prepare. That night, they moved like shadows. The climb was brutal. Layla's body screamed with every step, the bullet still lodged behind her ear like a cursed charm. She hadn't had proper medical treatment. Infection was a constant risk. But she couldn't stop, not when Serjak was so close. Every hour brought new flashes of memory, the moment he pulled the trigger, the way the villagers screamed, the blood in her eyes. She didn't want justice. She wanted retribution. As they crossed a narrow ice shelf, one of the survivors, a farmer named Derek, slipped. Layla lunged forward, grabbing his arm just as he started to fall, her boots skidding against the frozen edge. For a moment she thought they'd both go over, but Rijan threw himself on her legs, anchoring them. Together they hauled Derek back up. No one spoke after that. They were too cold, too exhausted, too aware of how thin the line between life and death had become. 2 days later, they reached Urazin. The village ruins looked like a graveyard of broken dreams, splintered rooftops poking from the snow, collapsed homes buried under ice. But Layla saw signs of life, faint tracks, smoke trails curling from a hidden chimney, and a crude wire alarm system draped between trees. Smugglers were definitely here. They approached cautiously, hands raised. Rijan spoke the code phrase he'd learned from a trader months ago, and after a tense silence, a gun barrel peeked out from the shadows. Then another, a man with a half-missing ear and a jagged scar down his cheek stepped forward, lowering his weapon. "You're not dead yet?" he asked Layla with a hint of admiration. "Not yet," she said, "but someone else will be." His name was Vesan, ex-military. Ran a weapons ring for deserters and rebels. Layla told him everything, her survival, the Goran front, the massacre, and Serjak's plan. Vesan listened without interruption, then disappeared into a snow-covered tunnel. When he returned, he had 3 assault rifles, a case of explosives, and an old Goran front uniform. "If you want to stop Serjak," he said, "this is your best shot. You won't get another." Layla looked at the explosives, then at the map. Dazrad Peak was fortified. She couldn't assault it head-on. But if she could get inside, disguised again, she might place charges on the comms tower, cripple their coordination, and bring the whole thing down before it even started. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore, she was planning a strike. That night, she sat by the fire with Rijan and the others, going over every detail. She drew the compound layout from memory. She memorized patrol schedules, and she sharpened her knife until the steel gleamed in the firelight. In 48 hours, she would walk straight into the hornet's nest, and this time, she wasn't leaving anything to chance. The wind howled like a living thing, as Layla crawled along the frozen ridge just below Dazrad Peak. Her fingers, numb with cold, clawed through snow and rock, inching her closer to the outpost that now loomed above the valley, like a concrete fist. The radar station had once been a military observation post, but now it bristled with barbed wire, makeshift gun nests, and patrols wearing the black insignia of the Goran front. At its heart stood a tall communications tower, a skeletal structure that scraped the sky and pulsed with red warning lights. If she could destroy that tower, it would sever Serjak's contact with the rest of his forces. It would be the beginning of his end. But getting inside was another matter entirely. Layla's plan depended on timing, disguise, and nerves of steel. With Vesan's forged credentials and the stolen she would pose as a courier, a supply runner delivering emergency rations and intel from the southern camp, which had conveniently been wiped out in the Nerit raid. She had even included fabricated reports about raider movements to give her story weight. The goal wasn't to infiltrate for days. She needed just one night. Enough time to plant the charges, disable the relay systems, and escape before the morning shift change. She reached the outer perimeter just before dusk. 2 guards in thick coats and mismatched boots stood lazily at the gate, smoking and arguing in dialect. Layla adjusted the cloth mask over her face, pressed the frost-worn ID card against her chest, and limped forward, like someone half-frozen and broken. "Courier from Khazran sector," she croaked. "Nerit overran us. I have field reports, high priority." The taller of the guards squinted at her, then snatched the papers she handed over. His eyes flicked over the words, frowning. "This says Sector C fell yesterday," he muttered. "They said it was fine on the comms this morning." Layla didn't blink. "Because Serjak doesn't want you to know the truth. They're coming from the south. If you don't mobilize now, you'll lose this post next." That did it. The shorter guard swore under his breath, and waved her through, muttering about how command always kept them in the dark. Layla kept her steps measured and slow, forcing herself not to look back, not to flinch, as the gate slammed shut behind her. Inside, The compound buzzed with tension. Soldiers moved with purpose, shouting orders and stacking crates near the central building. A few glanced at her, but didn't question her presence. The chaos of the recent raid worked in her favor. Paranoia made the enemy careless. She moved quickly, locating the tower's base entrance. It was locked, as expected, but near the generator room, she found an access panel bolted behind rusted mesh. She knelt, pretending to adjust her boot, while slipping a thin pry tool into the latch. A soft click followed. The panel opened, revealing a narrow crawl space into the substructure of the tower. Her heart pounded as she slipped inside. It was darker here, warmer too. Steam pipes hissed, and old wires dangled like veins through the narrow tunnel. She crawled forward, each movement driving pain into her skull, where the bullet still rested. But she didn't stop. She reached the tower's core, and placed the first charge behind a steel strut, then the second near the fuel lines, and the third, her ace, beside the main relay switch that connected the tower to the uplink grid. The detonator was simple, a remote trigger with a 30-second delay. It gave her just enough time to escape, or die trying. Just as she was about to retreat, she heard it, a voice, familiar, coarse, cruel. Serjak. He was in the main building, barking orders through a radio. Layla pressed herself against the wall of the tunnel, listening. He spoke of a mobilization at dawn, of cutting off the mountain pass, and sending a message to the Valderan government. Let them come, he growled. We'll bury them, like we buried their spies. Layla's fists clenched. She almost triggered the explosives right then, but she forced herself to wait. Her exit path was through the south gate, and if she detonated the tower now, she'd never reach it. She had to walk out the same way she came in, undetected. She retraced her steps, slipping back into the storm-drained shadows of the compound. But something was wrong. A pair of guards ran past her, shouting. One held a piece of torn cloth, her scarf, the one she'd left behind at the crawl space. Panic gripped her. The alarm hadn't been raised yet, but it would be soon. She needed to move now. She ducked into a supply tent, tore the ID from her uniform, and grabbed a crate to carry as cover. Then she walked, slow and steady, toward the southern checkpoint. A bored soldier waved her through, without a glance. She stepped beyond the wire fence, her breath fogging the freezing air. 10 steps, 20. Then she ducked behind a snow-covered boulder, raised the remote detonator, and pressed the button. The explosion was not loud, it was deafening. The comms tower erupted in a bloom of fire and smoke, collapsing in on itself, like a dying beast. Soldiers screamed, sirens blared. The sky lit up with orange flame. Layla didn't watch for long. She turned and ran into the trees, her legs churning through snow, her lungs burning. She didn't stop until the lights of the compound were gone behind her. And then, only then, did she allow herself to smile. The tower was down. Serjak was blind, and war had just begun. Smoke rose behind her, like a black pillar, casting a dark stain against the wintry twilight. Layla didn't stop running, until she collapsed beside a frozen creek, her body screaming for rest. The detonator still trembled in her hand. Every muscle burned. Her lungs fought for air, but the pain didn't matter. Not now. She had done it. The tower was gone. The Goran Front's most critical outpost was severed from the rest of their network, and Serjak's plan to control the mountain pass was falling apart before it could even begin. She lay there for a few minutes, listening to the wind shift, and then pushed herself upright. There was no time to waste. The explosion wouldn't kill Serjak. She knew that. He was a survivor, a cockroach. But the blow would rattle him. Blind and cut off from his units, he would retreat. Probably to the fallback position marked B7, on the map she'd stolen from the wrecked outpost, a gorge called Sferin's Mall, an icy bottleneck with only one way in and out. She smiled grimly. That was exactly where she wanted him. Layla met up with Rijan and the survivors at their makeshift base, deeper in the forest, near the remains of an old signal tower. It was here, beneath broken antenna dishes and overgrown watchtowers, that they lit their first fire since Urazan, no longer running, now regrouping. She shared the news.
Serjak's tower destroyed, his communications crippled. Hope flickered in the group's eyes, but also fear. "He'll come after us," Derek said, voice hollow. "He'll know it was you." "Good," Layla replied. "Let him." They weren't safe, and she knew it. Dazrad Peak was only part of Serjak's infrastructure. He still had men, still had weapons, but he was panicking now, and a panicking man made mistakes. She needed to press the advantage, before he could regain control. That night, she and Rajan sat by the fire, going over the Sverens Mall route. It was treacherous, thin passes, sheer drops, high winds that could knock a person off their feet. But strategically, it was perfect. Serjak would use it as a fallback, because it offered natural protection. What he didn't realize was that it also made him trappable. "I'm going after him," she said. Rajan stared at her. "Alone?" She shook her head, with a message. The next morning, before dawn, Layla took a tin plate, scraped charcoal from the fire, and etched a symbol into the metal, a spiral crossed by a blade. It was the mark used by Valderrani resistance fighters during the border wars. It meant "we see you." She hung the plate from the highest branch overlooking the route to the destroyed comms tower. A soldier would find it. Serjak would know what it meant. And then she lit the remains of the supply tent on fire. The column of black smoke that rose into the sky was impossible to ignore. It was a declaration, not just of survival, but of intent. Layla wasn't hiding anymore. She was calling him out, daring him to follow her. Within the day, her challenge was answered. A scouting group spotted Serjak's convoy, moving through the mountain basin, 8 trucks, armed guards, heavy cargo. Exactly what she expected. But they weren't heading for the lowlands. They were turning north, straight towards Sverens Mall. She set her plan into motion immediately. With Virjan's help, she gathered crude explosives, tripwire, and collapsed snowdrifts, waiting to be triggered. The cliffs above the gorge were brittle. With the right pressure, she could collapse the upper ridges and trap the convoy below. It would be dangerous. She had no fancy detonators, no drones, no artillery, just instinct, wire, and a little luck. The survivors helped where they could. Derek set traps along the lower path. A woman named Thera, once a carpenter, rigged an avalanche trigger from salvaged timber and steel wire. Even Rajan, young and still grieving, worked with fierce determination, planting spike barriers beneath the snow. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was a reckoning. Layla climbed the western cliff hours before the convoy was expected. She carried the last charge on her back, strung tight across her chest. The wind whipped against her face, freezing her skin. Below, the gorge yawned, like a mouth waiting to swallow its prey. She reached the outcropping above the narrowest choke point, wedged the explosive behind a loose boulder, and waited. The convoy arrived at dusk. Through a rusted scope, she watched them file in, trucks grinding through snow, soldiers walking alongside with weapons raised. And there, in the middle truck, surrounded by armed men, stood Serjak. His face, as cruel and smug as ever, tilted toward the cliffs, searching, expecting something. She didn't keep him waiting. Layla triggered the charge. The explosion cracked the silence like thunder, shaking the ridge. The boulder tumbled, followed by a cascade of snow and ice. The convoy stopped, shouts rang out. But before they could regroup, the second charge blew, ripping the cliffside apart, and sending tons of snow down onto the path. Chaos, trucks flipped, men screamed, weapons fired blindly into the cliffs. Layla didn't flinch. She slid down the ridge, with her rifle slung across her back, landing hard on the far side of the gorge, just outside the wreckage. She moved like smoke, weaving between snow piles, past overturned trucks, and half-buried bodies. She didn't shoot unless she had to. Her goal was simple: find Serjak. End this. She spotted him digging out of a half-collapsed cab, blood on his temple, fury in his eyes. One of his men saw her, and raised a weapon, but Layla fired first. The shot echoed across the gorge. The man fell. Serjak turned and locked eyes with her. Recognition, horror, then rage. He ran, but not far. Layla chased him up a ridge, through a narrow crevice of stone and ice. He turned once, fired wildly, Missed. She didn't. Her bullet struck his leg, dropping him into the snow. She approached slowly, rifle raised. You should be dead, he snarled. She didn't speak. You're just a... Her boot struck him hard across the jaw, cutting him off. I was a teacher, she said softly. Now I'm a message. She left him alive, barely, tied and stripped, buried beneath a broken signpost, with a resistance spiral carved into his chest plate. Someone would find him. Someone would know. Layla didn't need to kill him to win. She needed the world to see what he had become. Weak, humiliated, beaten by the very people he tried to crush. And the war, though far from over, had just shifted.
The sun rose cold and white over the mountain pass, turning the broken remnants of the Goran convoy into jagged shadows in the snow. Layla watched from a high ridge, her rifle slung across her back, the frost on her face melting into the bruises that still hadn't fully healed. She hadn't spoken since she left Serjak in the snow. She didn't need to. The message was written in the bodies buried beneath the avalanche, in the black smoke curling upward from the destroyed trucks, and in the silence that now clung to the mountain like a warning. For the first time since she had been shot in the head and left for dead, there was no pursuit, no patrols, no shouts, just wind and stillness. She had won a battle, but not the war. She returned to the survivors' camp alone. The others had scattered during the trap's execution, instructed to flee the moment the charges were triggered. Most had survived. A few hadn't. Farah was gone. Derek had taken shrapnel to the spine and could no longer walk. Regen had a burn across his arm that blistered and peeled. They didn't ask what happened to Serjak. They didn't have to. But something else was waiting for Layla. A radio. Static crackled through it like distant thunder, until a voice came through, faint but clear. This is Command Post Varel, receiving transmission from Resistance Cell B7. Repeat, this is Varel. Layla froze. That name Varel had once been a ghost story among border villages, a place so deep in the mountains that it served as both a hideout and last stand for resistance groups, too stubborn or too reckless to surrender. No one knew if it still existed. Most assumed it was just a tale. Now it was calling her back. She answered. Layla Varga, she said. Kazran sector. We took out Serjak's convoy. Comms tower destroyed. I need coordinates. I have survivors. There was a pause. Then affirmative. Coordinates incoming. Medical available. Resistance leadership en route. Prepare for extraction. It felt surreal. After weeks of hiding, running, bleeding, fighting, someone had finally heard her. But she didn't feel relief. Not really. That night, she sat by the fire while Regen slept beside her, curled under a stitched blanket. The boy had changed. He was no longer just a child. He hadn't been one since the Goran front rolled into their village and burned his world down. He looked older now, not in his face, but in the way he moved. Quiet, calculating, always watching the shadows. He was learning the lessons Layla had learned the hard way. Will they come for us again? He asked quietly, eyes flickering toward the dark. Layla didn't lie. Yes, she said. But not like before. The Goran front had taken a hit it couldn't hide. Word of Serjak's defeat would spread fast. His legend built on fear and blood had been shattered by a woman who wasn't supposed to survive. Rumors would twist what happened, of course. Some would say she was a ghost. Others, that she was a rogue operative, sent by the capital. She didn't care. As long as they believed she existed, the fear would do half her work for her. Still, something gnawed at her. Why had the bullet bent? It should have killed her.
Logically, medically, statistically.
She should have died in the snow that day, just another body for Serjak to step over. And yet she lived. Not just survived, but emerged stronger, colder, sharper. She'd become the weapon they never saw coming. In the morning, the sound of rotor blades shattered the silence. A black and gray tilter craft descended into the clearing, kicking up snow like a blizzard. Layla shielded her eyes, watching as soldiers disembarked, real ones this time, clean uniforms, proper gear, helmets, resistance command. A man approached her, face weathered, eyes sharp. You're Varga, he asked. She nodded. He glanced at the others, the wounded, the camp they had built out of nothing. Then back at her. You have no formal training, no rank, no clearance. And yet you've done more damage to the Goran front in 3 weeks than we've done in 3 months. Layla said nothing. You're a symbol now, he continued. Whether you like it or not, symbols were dangerous. They inspired hope, but they also attracted bullets. I didn't do it for that, she said quietly. I did it because they made me choose between surrendering and dying, and I chose to fight. The commander studied her, then gave a small nod. Let's get you out of here. You'll be debriefed at Varel. The council will want to hear every detail. After that, well, we'll see. She turned to Regin. You're coming with me. The boy looked stunned. But you survived. That's enough. They boarded the craft together. As the rotors lifted them skyward, Layla looked out over the mountains, jagged, unforgiving, beautiful in their cruelty. Somewhere down there, Serjak still crawled, humiliated and bleeding. Somewhere else, his commanders would be fuming, plotting revenge. And somewhere even further beyond, the world was waiting to learn the story of the woman who should have died, but didn't, who was shot in the head, and kept going. The flight to Varel felt longer than it actually was. The Tiltrow sliced through cloud banks and howling winds, but Layla barely noticed. Her head leaned against the cold steel wall of the aircraft, eyes half closed, though she wasn't asleep. Her thoughts wandered back to Kazran, to Serjak's pistol pressed against her forehead, to the impossible angle of the bullet that should have ended everything. And yet, here she was, flying above snow-blanketed mountains, carried by resistance aircraft toward a base that wasn't supposed to exist. When the craft dipped below the clouds, she saw it. Varel, the hidden city, wasn't a city at all. It was a labyrinth of bunkers, reinforced hangars, radio dishes, and camouflaged tunnels, dug into the side of a cliff. Soldiers in matte gray armor moved between buildings. Vehicles rolled silently across gravel paths. A massive banner, tattered and wind-worn, hung above the central command dome, painted with the insignia of the unified resistance, a cracked mountain peak, with a flame behind it. The aircraft touched down on a landing pad, built into the edge of the cliffs. Layla, Regin, and the survivors were escorted into a medical bay, lit by harsh fluorescent lights, and staffed by quiet medics, who didn't ask questions. They checked her vitals, scanned the wound in her skull. Whispers followed. The bullet was still there, buried just millimeters from vital tissue. One wrong movement, and it could shift, ending everything. But somehow, it hadn't. It had curved, almost as if it had hit a wall that wasn't there. She's walking with a dead woman's injury, one medic murmured. It makes no sense. It didn't have to. A few hours later, after stitches, antibiotics, and a proper meal, Layla was summoned to the upper levels of the command dome. Regin remained in the infirmary, surrounded by nurses, and a small pile of books someone had given him. His eyes lit up for the first time in days. Layla, meanwhile, was led down a narrow corridor, lined with data screens and surveillance feeds. She was escorted by 2 officers, both stone-faced, both avoiding eye contact. Something about her made people uneasy now, not because of what she'd done, but because of what she represented. A civilian-turned-soldier, a survivor who didn't break, a myth forged in blood. At the end of the hallway, a door slid open. Inside was a circular room, dimly lit, its walls covered in projection screens. Seated around a round table were 8 men and women, leaders of different cells, from various regions. All eyes turned toward her. The woman at the head of the table stood. I'm Commander Iral Kane, she said. We've heard your story. We've seen the aftermath. But now we want to hear it from you. No exaggerations, no rumors, just truth. So Layla told it, from the village to the bullet, from the goat shed to the camp raid, from the crawl space under the comms tower, to the ambush in Svorin's maw. She didn't hold anything back. She spoke plainly, coldly, honestly, and when she was done, the room was silent. Commander Kane leaned forward. You killed 26 confirmed combatants, sabotaged a key Goran node, crippled Serjak's force structure, and you weren't trained for any of it. I didn't need training, Layla replied. I needed a reason. Kane gave the faintest smile. You've given us more than that. The meeting turned. Kane explained that the resistance had been losing ground steadily. For months, they'd been pushed into hiding, outposts falling, morale low,
But now, after Layla's actions, cells in 3 border regions had begun rallying again. Serjak's humiliation had been broadcast via intercepted transmissions. His legend, once built on terror, was crumbling. "You've become a fulcrum," Kane said, "and we want to make use of that. With your consent." Layla didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, still shaking faintly from adrenaline. She wasn't a leader. She didn't want speeches or banners with her face on them. But the idea of being useful, of keeping this momentum going, that meant something. "What are you asking me to do?" she said finally. Kane pulled up a holographic map. "There's a weapons depot in the Ralvin Basin. Goran forces control it. If we take it, we cut off 2 entire brigades from resupply. We've tried 3 times, failed every time. But now they believe the woman who broke Serjak is out there. If they think you're leading the charge, they'll panic." Layla finished. Kane nodded. "And that gives us an opening." Layla stared at the map. Another target, another mission, another chance to strike before the bullet inside her skull decided it was done waiting. She knew it was risky, that every step forward made her a bigger target. But what was the alternative? Wait, hide. She looked up. "I'll go." Kane offered her a hand. "Welcome to Command Unit Alpha." But Layla didn't take it. Not yet. She turned, walked out of the room, and found Regin waiting near the infirmary, reading a book on military encryption. "You're coming with me," she said. He blinked. "Me? You know the land. You know the people. And you didn't flinch when everything around you fell apart." "But I'm not a fighter." "You weren't," she said. "Neither was I." As the two walked down the corridor toward the armory, Layla passed a mirror, an old cracked thing bolted to the wall. She paused. She looked at herself for the first time in weeks. The scar above her eyebrow had faded to a red line. Her eyes were harder, her stance tighter. She didn't look like the student she used to be. She looked like someone else entirely, someone built by fire. 3 days later, Layla stood on the edge of a sheer cliffside, staring down into the frozen expanse of the Ralvin Basin. The wind howled like a living thing, kicking up sheets of ice dust across the ridges below. Nestled in the center of the basin, half hidden by artificial camouflage nets and mobile artillery, was the Goran Weapons Depot, fortified, sprawling, and guarded by over 100 soldiers. It looked like a steel scar carved into the earth, and now it was her objective. She crouched beside Commander Kane and the others from Command Unit. The strike team was small, 15 in total, but each one had volunteered. Each one had read the reports, and each one had seen what Layla had done in Svorin's Mall. Her reputation had outpaced her now, threading its way into briefing rooms, hushed conversations, and war councils. To them, she was no longer a question mark. She was a catalyst. "This isn't just about stealing supplies," Kane whispered. "If we take this depot, the northern regiments fall apart. They're already stretched thin. Morale's in the dirt." Layla nodded. "And if we fail, they'll make an example of us. That's the part we're counting on not happening." They split into 2 teams. Layla led Alpha 1. Her team included Regin, now fitted with comms and a compact recon drone, as well as Nico, a former smuggler with a knack for climbing vertical walls. Kane led Alpha 2, flanking around the west ridge, to sabotage fuel reserves, and lay charges on the armored convoys. The approach was slow, crawling through snow, moving only when the searchlight swept away, breathing shallow. Layla could feel the faint thrum of her pulse in her skull, steady, rhythmic. The bullet was still there, buried deep. She'd started to think of it less as a threat, and more as a warning. Every heartbeat reminded her she wasn't supposed to be alive, so she'd better make the most of it. At 2:17 hours, the strike began. A concussive blast from the western fuel depot lit up the sky in orange. Sirens screamed. Goran soldiers scrambled into defensive positions, but they were shooting in the wrong direction. While they rushed west, Layla's team dropped over the eastern wall, sliding down tension ropes, and cutting silently through the outer patrols. Regin deployed the drone from under his jacket. The tiny craft zipped up into the air, relaying thermal visuals back to Layla's wrist pad. 4 heat signatures in the central depot. Probably officers, he whispered. Mark them, we take them alive, if we can. If not, no mistakes. They moved like shadows. Nico knifed a sentry before he could radio for help. Another fighter, Mara, planted jammers to block long-range transmissions. It was surgical chaos, destruction without noise, precision under pressure. Layla reached the central depot just as Kane's voice cracked through the comms. Charges placed, convoy disabled. 30 minutes before reinforcements arrived from base Corin, Layla entered the depot. The air inside was thick with oil and smoke. Ammunition crates lined the walls. 2 officers drew pistols when they saw her, but froze when they realized who she was. You, one of them muttered, stunned. You're the one they said. Serjak's ghost. She said nothing, just raised her rifle. They dropped their weapons without a fight. The 3rd officer tried to run. Regent tackled him to the ground before he made it 10 feet. He was faster than anyone expected, and far more brutal. The look in the boy's eyes made the others back away. Secure them, Layla ordered. We don't need trophies, we need data. They found maps, deployment orders, command codes, coordinates for Goran fuel depots further south. It was a gold mine, and then Nico's voice cut in. Layla, you need to see this. She followed him to a side chamber at the edge of the depot. The door was locked, until Nico hot-wired the keypad. Inside was a cold room, lined with containment units, biometric scans, medical charts, and in the center bullets, rows of them, modified, hardened, each stamped with Goran sigils. She stepped closer, examining one beneath the flickering lights. Then her heart nearly stopped. They weren't normal bullets. These were designed to break apart mid-trajectory, turning into jagged shrapnel. Impossible to trace, even more impossible to survive. The kind of round that killed not just the body, but the memory of it. Layla, Nico said, holding up a scanned manifest. This one matches your record. The shot Serjak fired, it was one of these. She stared at the paper, then at the bullet. So it hadn't bent inside her skull, because of luck. It had malfunctioned, or had it? Regent walked over, reading over her shoulder. What if it didn't malfunction? He said quietly. What if something made it turn? She looked at him. Like what? He hesitated. Maybe it wasn't time. Maybe it wasn't your time to die. Layla didn't believe in fate. But in that cold room, surrounded by weapons designed to erase people from the world, the idea didn't seem entirely ridiculous. Then Kane's voice crackled over comms. Extraction in 5. Hostiles inbound. Move. They set fire to the depot before leaving. Controlled burns with thermite strips. As they retreated over the ridge, the whole basin behind them bloomed in flames. The sky turned gold, then black with smoke. They didn't look back. By sunrise, the Goran front had lost more than just a weapons cache. They'd lost the illusion of control. And Layla Varga, the girl with a bullet in her brain and fire in her blood, had just become the centerpiece of their unraveling. The morning after the depot raid, word spread like wildfire, not just through resistance channels, but across black market radios, encrypted trade lines, and even whispers in the outer Goran ranks. Soldiers who once feared speaking her name, now wore it like a charm against death. Layla Varga, the girl with the bullet that bent, the ghost of Severin's mole, the one who killed Serjak's men, and walked away unbroken. But for Layla, none of it felt real. She sat in the war room at Varl, a mug of stale tea in her hands, the residue of smoke and diesel still clinging to her coat. Across from her, Regent snored softly in a makeshift bunk, clutching his drone like a stuffed animal. Kane's command team shuffled in and out, speaking in half-sentences, drawing new attack routes with trembling fingers. The entire base felt like it was holding its breath, caught between awe and disbelief. In the corner, a junior officer clicked through intercepted transmissions. One caught Layla's ear. Confirm unverified report. Depot incinerated. Possible involvement of ghost unit. Layla raised an eyebrow. Ghost unit. The officer turned. That's what they're calling your team now. Command's debating whether to make it official. She gave a dry, humorless smile. Might as well lean into the myth. But it wasn't a myth. Not to her. She still remembered every face, every scream, every moment crawling through filth with a gun in her hands, not knowing if she'd live another minute. She remembered the weight of the silence after Serjak pulled the trigger, the pause where death should have rushed in, and didn't. That memory had become a legend, one she hadn't asked for, but one she couldn't walk away from now. Kane called her in a few hours later. The war table had changed, no longer just maps and coordinates. Now there were portraits, wanted Goran commanders, field agents, scientists, people who were rarely seen and even more rarely caught. You made them bleed, Kane said, gesturing to the new intel. Now they're trying to sew themselves back together. They've tightened their convoys, reinforced key installations. That makes them vulnerable. Why? Because they're panicking. When soldiers panic, they get sloppy. When leaders panic, they make mistakes. Kane slid a file across the table. It was thick, and inside were photos of a pale man with cybernetic eyes and a grim expression. His name, Colonel Halred Kerr, former military researcher, current head of Goran's experimental division, and the designer of the fragmented bullet that still sat inside Layla's skull. He's the one who made the round Serjak used. Kane explained. He's stationed in Merix, an abandoned observatory converted into a black site. Layla flipped through the dossier. Surveillance photos, heat signatures. One blurry image showed Kern overseeing a test fire. He's trying to create something worse, Kane added. Smart ammo. Heat-seeking rounds that can track pulse rates. Layla stared at the page. How soon? 6 days until full deployment. The room went quiet. So we stop him, Layla said. Kane hesitated. It won't be like the depot. No fuel tanks to ignite. No scattered patrols. This place is a fortress buried in a mountain. We won't just need stealth. We'll need misdirection. Layla nodded slowly. Let them think I'm attacking somewhere else. Kane raised an eyebrow. You'd use your own name as bait. I don't care about the name. Let them chase the ghost. In the next 2 days rumors were planted. A convoy was sent south, filled with empty crates and fake weapons. It was publicly branded as Ghost Unit 02, complete with planted soldiers wearing Layla's insignia. Goran Command snapped at the bait. They rerouted half their western defenses to intercept the decoy. Meanwhile, Layla and the real Ghost Unit went east, quiet, fast, deep into the Arvin Range toward Merix Observatory. The terrain was hell. Frozen switchbacks, ice that cracked underfoot, avalanches in the distance like distant thunder. But she didn't stop. None of them did. They reached the edge of the valley by dusk. From a high perch, Layla looked down on the facility. Merix was unlike anything she'd seen. Half science station, half bunker. Its radar dishes, spinning slowly like blind eyes. Drones patrolled the sky. Automated turrets scanned the tree line. Inside somewhere was Colonel Kern, working on weapons that would erase resistance fighters before they ever pulled the trigger. Rajan crawled up beside her, goggles pressed to his face. I count 5 towers, he whispered, each one with drone uplinks. We kill those. The air goes dark. Layla nodded. Nico, the smuggler chimed in through the comms, already climbing the southeast ridge. I'll take out the relay station manually. Layla closed her eyes for a second, focused on the rhythm of her pulse. The bullet in her skull wasn't just a wound anymore. It was her compass. It beat when she was near danger. It beat when she hesitated. And now as she prepared to infiltrate a base designed to exterminate people like her, it beat louder than ever. Let's move. They slipped down the mountain, one by one vanishing into the trees. The assault on Merix had begun, not with an explosion, but with silence. And somewhere inside that black site, the man who designed her death sat unaware that his creation had come back to kill him. The deeper they moved into Merix, the more unnatural everything felt. It wasn't like the Goran bases they'd raided before. This place wasn't built for soldiers. It was built for experiments. Corridors were lined with reinforced glass, behind which machines hissed and blinked. Cryo chambers, magnetic testing arrays, and weapon diagnostic stations were stacked beside gene sequencing pods. Even the air felt sterile, too clean, too filtered. Every footstep echoed, every breath felt monitored. Layla's squad moved in silence, weapons ready. The path to Kern was a twisting nightmare of encrypted doors, laser tripwires, and automated turrets. But Nico, having worked with similar security back in his smuggling days, made short work of the locks. Rajan kept the comms dark, periodically scanning ahead with his drone, identifying heat signatures and motion sensors. The facility wasn't heavily staffed, no more than 30 personnel, all of them scientists or engineers, but the tech they controlled was lethal. At one checkpoint, a technician tried to trigger a failsafe. Merrick gunned him down before his hand hit the alarm panel. Layla felt a strange tightness in her chest, not from guilt, but from purpose. Every door they opened led them closer to the man who had nearly erased her. Not with a bomb or a knife, but with a weapon designed to leave no survivors, no evidence, no memory. And now he was inside this tomb of steel and glass continuing that work. The thought burned like acid in her throat. They reached the command center at 4:26 hours, a control room domed in glass, overlooking the lower labs. Inside was Kern, the man who had engineered death with surgical precision. He stood alone, hunched over a terminal, watching simulation footage on a looping screen. It showed a bullet, his bullet, fragmenting inside a human skull, then another, and another. The carnage was clean, almost clinical. There was no artistry to it, just perfect execution. Layla stepped inside without announcing herself. No warning, no clever taunt, just silence. Kern turned and froze. His cybernetic eyes flickered as they scanned her. You, his voice trembled with fascination more than fear. You're the anomaly. I'm the mistake you made, she replied coldly, and I came to correct it. To her surprise, he didn't beg or run. He simply looked at her with eerie interest. You survived the Serjak shot, he said, stepping closer. It wasn't possible. We tested it. Hundreds of simulations. The fragmentation should have severed your cortex in under a millisecond. It bent, she said, inside my skull. Why? Kern paused. I don't know. That answer unsettled her more than any threat would have. You don't know, she repeated. Kern nodded, almost reverently. Your survival broke every rule we built this weapon on. Physics, ballistics, medical science. It's like the bullet decided not to finish the job. Layla stared at him, something tightening behind her eyes. Rajan stepped forward, weapon raised. You're lying. There has to be a control factor. There was no error, Kern said quietly. If there had been, the others would have survived too. But they didn't. Just you. He turned to his screen and brought up a scan, a cerebral map. Her cerebral map. It had been pulled from old Goran intel, back when she was presumed dead. Her brain activity elevated. Her cranial fracture spiraled, a pattern unlike anything they'd seen. He zoomed in on a sector labeled reticulated cluster, a part of her brain that should have been obliterated. Instead it glowed with sustained synaptic activity. You shouldn't be conscious, he said, but here you are, and every time you get near conflict, that section lights up again. Are you saying the bullet changed her? Mara asked. No, I think the bullet revealed her. Layla's mouth was dry. Her hand shook not with fear, but with rage. You built that round to erase people like me. No trace, no record, just meat. Kern nodded. Yes, and it worked. But you became something else. She didn't wait for him to say more. She pulled the trigger. The shot punched through his chest, flattening him against the terminal. He gasped once, staggered, and collapsed. Layla walked up to the body, staring down at the man who had nearly made her a footnote in a forgotten massacre. But she didn't feel satisfaction, only clarity. She turned to Rishan. Burn everything. They moved quickly, uploading every file they could find into encrypted drives before initiating the facility's destruction sequence. Thermite charges were placed in structural weak points, explosive gel packed into the central power core. By the time the first Goran recon teams picked up the breach, Ghost Unit was already halfway down the Arvin Ridge. Behind them, the Merrick's observatory glowed orange, then erupted into a mountain-shaking blast that turned the sky to smoke. Later that night, by the campfire, Karn sent word through secure channels. Karn confirmed that his research gone. The Bullet project collapsed, and Layla Varga sat by herself, tracing the scar above her right temple, feeling the thrum of the foreign object still lodged in her skull. Rishan approached and offered her a ration bar. She didn't take it. He didn't know why it bent, she said softly. Maybe it didn't bend, Rishan replied. Maybe you did. She didn't respond. She just stared at the fire, wondering if the bullet inside her was dormant or waiting. The world now whispered her name like a warning. To some she was vengeance, to others, a myth. But to the people she fought for, she had become something else entirely. A weapon that refused to die. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on